Joining us now, Congressman, 5th District, Virginia, Republican, Tom Garrett, lawyer, knows what he's talking about. Congressman, good to have you back.
Down taxcutswork.com. Okay, I'm ready.
Taxcutswork.com. You know, I love when you help me read my promos. Yeah, very impressive.
Well, I can, if you want, I can try to do my radio voice and read your promos for you. No. How are you?
Never better, but we've missed you. I'm happy that you're on today, Tom Garrett. And before we get into all this politics of Richard Cohen, Syria, how's the baby? How's your wife?
Well, the baby is doing well, and my wife is doing really well, and I still haven't figured out why she married me. But we take the blessings that we were bestowed with in this life if we're wise, and so everything is good.
Well, Congressman, like me, you married way up. Just I happen to marry even up, even higher. But I ask myself every day.
I'm not going to tell my wife you said that.
No, I mean, as far as I'm below your status, you see. So that's
I don't
that's
believe
what
that.
I meant. Yeah, I'm below your status. So that's the biggest sale I ever made, and I got to sell it every day. I got to sell it every day. She's looking for that, money back return guarantee thing 30 years later. But look, let's get to Michael Cohen, the raid, the president, Rod Rosenstein. We had Morgan Griffith on a little bit earlier, your colleague. He said, maybe we should start impeachment hearings in Congress for Rosenstein. He's got to go. What say you?
Well, if you read the Constitution, we're going to try to avoid the sort of partisan hyperbolic rhetoric and boil this down to fundamentals. The president under Article 2 has appointment power of the attorney general, et cetera. When they talk about potential obstruction charges, had the president or if the president fires someone who the president is solely responsible for choosing, I scratch my head and wonder what alternative reality we live in. Now, that obviously would be Sessions, but Rosenstein is acting in Sessions' stead by virtue of Sessions' recusal. So it's certainly within the purview of the president or of Congress to initiate such proceedings. I have to be a little careful here because I don't know what I don't know. But based on what I do know, the raid is mind-numbing. I believe a frightening step away from constitutional protections that we're entitled to under the Bill of Rights. And I think these thoughts are sort of undergird by the words of people like Alan Dershowitz, with whom I do not agree politically, who says this is a dark day for lawyer-client privilege in America and that we should be concerned with what's going on. Having said that, let me talk a little bit. Let me take this thing just a little bit farther down the road. The screaming and yelling about Russian collusion and the complete absence of any indication of actual collusion with anyone other than perhaps Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State has essentially empowered, ironically, Russia. If Putin were to stand up at a podium tomorrow and say, I have colluded with Donald Trump, in the absence of any evidence whatsoever, we would be thrown into a constitutional crisis because the Democrats would go, see, look, we told you. So we've essentially empowered the Russians. I've had the privilege of speaking to people from the foreign minister's office in Ukraine, Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, all of whom say that Russian meddling in elections is never targeted to help or hurt a particular candidate, and they should know something about this, but instead targeted to undermine Western-style democracy and the confidence in the system. If that is the Russians' goal, the Democrat Party has helped them in succeeding beyond any of their wildest expectations. It's deleterious and dangerous to our republic. The nature of the rhetoric now is frightening. The odds of being hospitalized in an act of political violence, if you're a Republican member of Congress, if you just take the last 12 months as a window, are about 1 in 145. If you extend that out over a 10-year career, they're about 1 in 14.5. There's no media attention to this, but the radical left is genuinely unhinged, and truth is the first casualty as it relates to achieving an outcome without regard to process.
I mean, that's an unbelievable indictment that you just said here. So this is a tough one for people to take, and I think this is a clarion moment in the United States, as you say, Congressman Tom Garrett, because this could happen to anybody. I mean, once you can just get warrants, I mean, I don't even know what – we need to know what was even in this affidavit.
The other thing is the double standard. So Secretary Clinton gets to have her personal assistant during her FBI interview, who's an attorney but who hasn't ever practiced law in the last however many years. And then the fact that 30-some-odd thousand emails were deleted and a hard drive was smashed with a hammer after being bleached with bleach bit is completely ignored. Nobody on the left's talking about obstruction of justice when you have overt knowledge of destruction of evidence in a criminal investigation. Nobody's talking about it. So I will reiterate the part that I said on the front end. I don't know what I don't know. But if I'm an American citizen and I can divorce myself of any political leanings and look at this through a clear pane of what we know, this is really, really scary as it relates to our ability to trust those empowered to do justice equally in this nation. And this, as a nation of laws, we should be built on the idea of equal justice.
I don't think we have equal justice here because it's being applied for political gain from one to the other. Here's the other thing.
Well, we don't know the scope of what was carried out in the boxes of papers that left Cohen's office. But certainly, in the hypothetical scenario that there ever was another non-disclosure agreement, we're going to hear about that because these people leak like a sieve. If there was ever an acquisition of a company in 1989 wherein Tax Form 774B wasn't properly and timely filed, we'll hear about that. I mean, you get into somebody's lifelong attorney's paperwork, particularly someone whose net worth is in the $3 billion range. I'm sure that if you're looking for I's dotted and T's crossed, you're going to find something. And then, of course, it'll be imputed to be something that the president had personal knowledge of or awareness or what have you, which I think is a stretch. But, we've already seen so many other stretches made. So, again, I think we've got an any means necessary attitude on the left. There have been impeachment votes repeatedly already. On what grounds, I'm not sure. I mean, the Constitution says high crimes and misdemeanors. What we have now are allegations unsubstantiated. But your listeners should know that it's Al Green of Texas who brings up the impeachment motion probably every other month. Now, I candidly like Al Green when we're in a room just talking one-on-one, but, there were people marching the day after the inauguration calling for impeachment, right? I mean...
Yes, this is the other thing. Rosenstein is a career yes man, but three things bother me here. And I just want to get your opinion, and then we'll move on to Syria. Number one, it was Rosenstein who sent the letter to the president recommending that James Comey get fired, right? So the president takes his advice, fires Comey. Then Rosenstein takes Robert Mueller in to meet the president and suggests that Mueller should be the new FBI director. The president didn't think so. He didn't want another George Bush holdover. He wanted somebody new. So he said no. Days later, Rosenstein launches the special counsel and appoints Robert Mueller. Now, there's been three inspector general's reports. One on the investigation, on the fake dossier where they got the eavesdropping warrant in Trump Tower based on opposition
research. And they worked with a
research.
foreign agent to influence an American election. I like to point that out.
Thank you. That's not been released. The whole investigation by the IG on the Clinton emails and Uranium One and the Clinton Foundation, that's not been released, right? So, I mean, he's not released anything. I mean, this guy is turning into Mueller's little stooge. Whatever Robert Mueller puts in front of this guy, he signs it. I mean, it was
it's just, again, the nepotism, the incestuousness of the whole thing. It's the same names again and again and again. And they all sort of track back to the same family tree, and it all emanates, I think, from the origin of the creation of sort of a sub-secret government, if you will, that happened in the Clinton administration, where you started getting political litmus tests for promotions in places like the military and to high-level non-appointed bureaucracy. And it's not hard to walk this dog backwards.
What is the objective of this special counsel? Is it to
find...
What's the
objective?
What's the objective?
Well, it's got to be complete control and sort of transfer of power to people who are ideological kindred spirits, right? I mean,
right.
The sort of the monolithic nature of the story that's fed particularly to our young people as it relates to, how you have to think in order to be accepted by your peers. It really all sort of comes back to a middle school, junior high school paradigm. and the uniform vilification of those who disagree, and then the shouting and hurling of invective names like Nazis and fascists, etc., by the very people who are acting the most like the names they're calling people. It's all so well coordinated. It's impressive and scary.
Very scary. If you're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, trucking the truth across America, you're Godzilla of the Truth, live from Washington, D.C. We're with Republican Congressman Tom Garrett, lawyer, 5th District, Virginia. Let's get to Syria. I'm unconvinced that it's Assad that dropped that bomb, but let's say it is. The president now was going to get out. Now we're talking about firing missiles. The Russians saying, well, if you fire missiles, we're going to shoot them out of the sky. This thing is escalating days after the president was doing the right thing and getting us the hell out of there. What happens now?
So my theory is, and I have no inside knowledge of this, so I can speak to it because, ironically, sometimes when I know things that I've learned via particular means, I can't discuss them. My theory is that we've got a target list, that there's a strike in the works, and that there's so many foreign nations' forces on the ground, Turkey, Iran, Russia, the United States, Syria, not to mention affiliated subordinate combatant groups, that we can't deconflict fires, that the reason we haven't seen a strike yet is because we don't want to kill the wrong people, which is something. It kind of speaks to letting the proverbial bull into the china shop, if you will. I do think that Assad is to blame. It's because it's hard for me to walk this line to another logical conclusion. I like to remind people that in 2014, CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post were falling all over themselves because President Obama had so deftly, quote, removed 100% of the declared chemical weapons from Syria without firing a shot. And then PolitiFact ran a story in 2017 after Assad used chemical weapons, rating the claims of the Obama administration as having removed all the chemical weapons as mostly true. That illustrates, as an aside, just how co-opted entities like PolitiFact have become, because it becomes really hard to say there are no chemical weapons in the hands of the Assad regime when they repeatedly use them to target people within the boundaries of their country. Having said that, we need to be very careful because what we do may influence the balance of power. And I'll give you as an example the fact that there were about 1.5 million Christians in Iraq, for example, in 2004. We're down in the 200,000 neighborhood. We've had a genocide in the diaspora, the scope of which is probably unseen since Armenia at the turn of the 20th century. Nobody hears about it, I guess, because these are Christians and Alawites and Yazidis. But if you tilt the scales in the wrong direction, then ISIS is resurgent, and any religious minority in Syria is completely unsafe. So, this is a tough one. And it really results from an attitude that ISIS was the JV team and that we could let this languish and that it would be taken care of regionally, and turning a blind eye on the acts of the Assad regime and the Russians that led to this point.
Right.
It's a whole lot easier to take out a cancer when you find it early than it is to wait until it metastasizes, and that's what's happened here. Even Obama aides have said that Trump was handed a horrible hand in Syria by the Obama administration. No, I'm not trying to cast blame, but in a world where everything seems to be this administration's fault, I like to tell the truth.
The truth will set you free, no question about it. And the truth lives here on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Speaking of truth, Congressman, this just in, Paul Ryan announcing we expect later today or tomorrow he will not run for re-election, which means you're going to get a new speaker one way or the other. Either it's going to be Nancy Pelosi or you, but it's not going to be Paul Ryan. What do you make
I
of
can
it?
tell you it ain't going to be me. So
What do you make
if that's the binary alternative, then we will not win in the midterms.
What do you make of it?
Tom Garrett isn't interested in being the speaker.
There's going to be a lot of speculation, but let's wait on that. Paul Ryan not going to run for re-election. Reaction.
Well, there's been a buzz about this for months. I think the story broke that he might step down as speaker. I didn't believe that. I thought it was a brilliant way to keep people who might be disenchanted with the way things are running from starting an insurrection. I commend Paul Ryan on, I think, trying hard to do what he thought was right. Certainly, I've disagreed with him on occasion, but I've never had to walk a mile in his shoes. I think he's got a distinguished career of public service at a relatively young age, and that there certainly will be a future for him. But I want to see if we are able to hold the House bold leadership that will act on things like federal cannabis reform, like student loan reform, like sort of a bureaucratic term limit concept. I want to see us address entitlements whilst being compassionate to Americans. I want to see us prioritize border security with American citizens in mind, not foreign nationals. So, again, I have nothing but compliments for Speaker Ryan, but I think we can do better moving forward, and I hope that we get leadership that will allow us to do that.
Well, let's see after the midterms if you're even in a position to do that. It's going to be dicey. It's going to be close. I think if you hang on, it's by a handful of seats at best. Congressman Tom Garrett, I didn't have you on for 2 weeks. We were getting the shakes, right? We got to get our Tom Garrett fix every week. Great to have you with us. Your insight, your candor, your forthrightness is breathtakingly refreshing, as always. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, man. Tom Garrett, FORcongress.com. We need your help and support and appreciate the opportunity.